Alors, je rappelle le comité.
Order, please. Good afternoon. This is meeting number 75 of the Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics. Today, we are continuing the meeting that we hadn't managed to have with Commissioner Suzanne Legault from the Office of the Information Commissioner. She will be speaking about her 2010-11 and 2011-12 annual report. So we'll start with 10 minutes of opening remarks, and then we'll move on to a period of questions from the members. In her opening remarks, the Information Commissioner will be referring to both reports, and therefore questions can be put on either report. With no further delay, I'll give Ms. Legault the floor. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Invitation to appear in relation to your study on my annual reports for the years 10-11 and 11-12. These 2 years represent the first 2 years following my official nomination as Information Commissioner, on the heels of having served in the position for an interim year in 09 and 10. So preparing for this appearance actually caused me to reflect on the work the OIC team has accomplished in the last 3 years. It also caused me to review the conditions that existed at the time I took the helm of the office, conditions which have informed and guided my actions since. So let me review these briefly. First, when I took over as Interim Commissioner in 2009, the OIC was literally crippled by an unprecedented inventory of old cases dating as far back as 2002. The number of cases in the inventory at the beginning of that year stood at over 2,500 cases. This is compounded by the fact that the OIC received in the last 4 years an average of 1,600 additional cases a year. The average turnaround time for a case at that time was around 450 days. Second, the Federal Accountability Act had recently come into effect, bringing under the purview of the Act 69 new institutions, most notably, as you know, a number of Crown corporations, along with new exclusions and exemptions, adding a new level of complexity. Third, there had been a steady decline in 2 key performance measures in accessing federal government information. In terms of timeliness, only slightly more than half of all requests made to federal institutions were completed within 30 days. In terms of disclosure, less than 1/5 of all requests resulted in all information being disclosed. Fourth, the open government movement was developing rapidly at the time in countries like the United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia. And fifth, the office's corporate governance was in need of a serious makeover. Compte tenu de ces défis,
given these challenges, I set out a clear direction in 2010-2011 in the OIC strategic plan, which has 3 key results areas: an exemplary service to Canadians, a leading access to information regime, and an exceptional workplace. The annual reports of 2010-2011 and 2011-2012, as well as the upcoming 2012-2013 annual report, highlight our achievements in addressing these key results areas. When I first took on the role of Information Commissioner, I made a commitment to maximize the effectiveness and timeliness of my office to meet the needs and expectations of Canadians. As the annual reports show, we have made great strides towards the achievement of this objective through sustained and ongoing efforts. Let me give you some of the key numbers.
and you will allow me to do this, 1,796 files. I know people tell me I'm not supposed to use exact numbers, but if you live in my world, one less file is one more accomplishment. But that amounts to a reduction of 28.5%. We have closed close to 7,300 complaints since April 2009, including some of our oldest and most complex cases that had accumulated in the office over the years. Our average turnaround time is now 380 days, which is just slightly over 12 months. But more importantly, if you take out the outlier, which are the old cases that we're continuing to close, our median turnaround time now stands at 215 days. And the one measure I'd like you to keep in mind for my next appearance on the main estimates, our median turnaround time once a case is actually assigned to an investigator is now around 86 days, which means that when I have somebody to assign a case to, people can expect a result in 90 days. Unfortunately, I don't have sufficient people to assign all the cases to at this time. One of the challenges we now face is the changing composition of our complaints. Our caseload is almost exclusively composed of complex refusal files. Really, about 88% of our files are now complex files, a large proportion of which deal with issues of national security and international affairs, complaints against the Canada Revenue Agency, and complaints against the CBC. Pendant la période examinée,
during the period of time under review, we dealt with some key investigations, such as the first referral to the Attorney General under Section 67.1 and the special report dealing with interference in the processing of access requests. We also, during that period, had some key court decisions, such as the Bronskill decision, clarifying cases dealing with national security, the Federal Court of Appeals decision, confirming the Commissioner's authority to compel the production of documents under the control of the CBC, and the Supreme Court of Canada decision stating that ministers' offices are not part of the government institutions for which they are responsible. These decisions are now being applied through our investigations, and our upcoming annual reports will shed light on their implications for requesters' rights. On the key result area of a leading access to information regime, we've been active on several fronts. It is, of course, not a secret that I am a strong believer in the need for legislative reform for access to information. But the focus of our activities for the period under review was on the overall performance of the access regime and on open government.
Three-year plan on report cards, which specifically looked at timeliness. In the course of this project, we reviewed 32 institutions amongst those that received the most requests. We made a number of recommendations, both at the institutional level and at the Treasury Board Secretariat, as the body responsible for the administration of the Act. Most of these recommendations have been implemented and have achieved positive results. The most noteworthy being the collection of detailed statistics with a view to better diagnosing the problems in the system and the various modifications to Treasury Board policies dealing with delegation of authority and mandatory consultations. La surveillance exercée par votre...
The scrutiny of your committee over the years has also played an important role in prompting institutions to better comply with the Act. I have asked institutions in the most recent report cards to report their progress in implementing our recommendations in their mandatory annual reporting to Parliament under the Access Act. It is my hope that this was accepted by the Treasury Board Secretariat, and Treasury Board will tell institutions to respond to our recommendations. It is my hope that this committee will review these reports and follow up on them as you see fit to ensure ongoing scrutiny of the performance of institutions in meeting their access to information obligations under the Act.
Investigation into the coordination of access to information requests system called CARES, where I recommended to the President of the Treasury Board that all federal institutions post the summaries of completed requests on their websites and that a central search feature is enabled to allow the public to search the lists of requests. Since January 2012, all federal institutions have to post this information on their website, and the government is planning to have searchable summaries by next year. During the 2 years under review, I spent considerable effort on promoting the benefits of the open government movement in speeches before this committee in 2012 and through a joint resolution of all information and privacy commissioners in 2010, which called on all governments to embrace open government principles for greater transparency and accountability. I was really happy to see that the government adopted an open government platform in the spring of 2011. On behalf of all the Information and Privacy Commissioners of Canada, I also sent a letter to the President of the Treasury Board last year to provide recommendations for the government's action plan for its work as a member of the Open Government Partnership. The key recommendation, which was supported by all commissioners across the country, was to update the Access to Information Act. À l'automne 2011,
In the fall of 2011, I hosted the 7th International Conference of Information Commissioners in collaboration with the Canadian Bar Association. This was the first time that this conference was held in Canada. This event brought together more than 250 participants, including 36 international, provincial, and territorial commissioners. The conference culminated in the release of a joint resolution signed by commissioners of 23 countries that call on governments to enshrine the right to information in national laws. On the key result area of an exceptional workplace, we focused on developing an integrated human resources plan and modernizing the corporate governance of the office with the leading initiative of modernizing our information management systems. This 5-year strategy started in 2009 and is slated to finish in 2013-14. So far, we are on time, on target, and on budget.
The OIC during the period of time under review today, and as you can see by now, I'm actually very proud of everything that we have accomplished. However, as you will see in my upcoming annual report for the year 12-13, which will be published likely in June, much remains to be done, especially since the modest gains at the system level, which I reported upon in 11-12, appear to have disappeared. After all, 2013 marks the 30th anniversary of the coming into force of the Access to Information Act, a key driver of democracy, transparency, and accountability. So let's make sure that we actually have cause to celebrate. You will find in the package that was distributed a number of documents that provide a lot of additional information on the work of the office, and I hope that these documents will actually be helpful in answering your questions this afternoon. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'm ready to answer your questions.
Merci beaucoup pour votre présentation.
Thank you very much for your opening remarks. And I'll now give Ms. Borg the first question for 7 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I'd like to thank Ms. Legault for coming before the committee today. You've had some very interesting remarks to make, and I'm sure your responses will be just as interesting. My first question is this. You said in your report that of the 20% are satisfied of the access to information request. I think that's quite worrying for the Canadian population. In an interview, you said that the turnaround time has never been so long. Perhaps you could just expand on that and tell us what the impact of that time is on transparency. Well, what I was referring to are government statistics. These are statistics that are published. Usually these statistics are about 1 year behind, so the ones we had were 2011-2012. And there are two measures of performance. There's the time that it takes to respond, the turnaround time, and the amount of information that is disclosed. What we've seen over the past 10 years is the very best performances that we've seen involve 69 cases that are dealt with in 30 days. Now we're at 55.5. So what that means is that there were 7 people out of 10 that used to receive their information in 30 days, and now 5.5 out of 10 receive that information. Now, in terms of disclosure, we were at about 40% in terms of those cases where there was full disclosure, and now we're about 20%. So what that means is that before 4 pages out of 10 were provided, and now 2 pages out of 10 are provided. Thank you very much.
You spoke a little bit about the Open Data Initiative, and I think it's a really important thing that governments open up their data to be more transparent and so that Canadians can more easily access that information. However, what we're seeing is an increase, a yearly increase of about 2.5%. In your opinion, is that enough? Is that a steady increase of amount of data that we're putting online, or should we be doing better, perhaps?
I really don't know whether we have a 2.5% increase in the number of data that's published. I really don't know those statistics. I think the government has done quite a lot since it's actually decided to adopt the Open Government Movement and the Open Government Partnership. It's actually doing quite well in terms of its own action plan. There's a lot of data sets that are being published. We have joined the International Aid Transparency Initiative. There are statistics from Statistics Canada that are published on the website for free. Some of them used to be pay for fee. So I think overall, I think the government is doing really well in the open government, and it's continuing to progress. The posting of summaries of completed requests is also part of their action plan. I mean, it followed one of our recommendations several years ago, but it's something that the government has acted upon. So I think all in all on the open government, we've made some great strides.
Okay, merci. Ma troisième question, évidemment, on est dans un ère numérique.
My third question is this. We live in a digital age now, and so it's very easy to get access to information. Perhaps you could just expand on the pilot project that you began. In the United States, they use a model that allows one to make requests online for access to information. Do you think that's something we should be evolving towards? Is that a model that we should be looking at? Yes. One thing that I think the government should do and has begun doing is to improve its administration of access to information using more modern technology. The pilot project that you're referring to was put forward by the government. It wasn't the Office of the Information Commissioner that did this. And something that I have been recommending for a long time is to look at other jurisdictions, for example, Mexico, where they have a transparency portal. So through that portal, they can make requests for access to information. They can do it online. They can also file complaints online. And they can request documents. They can actually search documents online. They can search results. So there are interesting information technologies that exist that could improve the system. Let's not forget that today, in the majority of cases, one has to write out a check for $5, send a letter, etc. And so for a long time now, I've been saying that system has to be updated. But the government is now starting that, and I think that's a good thing. And so you believe the pilot project is working? Well, I can't really comment on that. I think it just started. It came out last week. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes. Thank you. My next question is about the 8% budget cuts that were made to your office. How has that affected your mandate, and how has that affected your ability to respond to access to information requests and administer your office? Well, as I was saying in my opening remarks, the main impact that we see is this. When I have investigators that I'm assigning cases to, we can be very efficient in the turnaround time for dealing with those cases. But what's happening now is that despite a reduction in our inventory, in the inventory that I inherited, we still have over 1,800 cases in our inventory. So what that means is that our ability to reduce that backlog and continue to deal with the cases that come in efficiently is affected, of course, by those cuts. And that's what I said last year as well. And I'm sure we'll be speaking about that in 2 weeks when I appear on the supplementary, on the main estimates, rather. So it used to be a median response of 215 days and then 86. So when I can assign it to investigator, that's a big difference. When you're talking about access to information, obviously an independent review of decisions, government decisions by the Commissioner's Office is part and parcel of our very principle of a working access to information system. So in my opinion, yes, the cuts have definitely affected the rights of requesters. Do I have any time left, Mr. Chairman? You have about 10 seconds. In that case, I'll just thank you. Ms. Davidson, you now have the floor for 7 minutes.
It's me. Sorry. And thanks, Commissioner, for coming back again today, and hopefully we'll get through today and get our questions asked and our answers received. I know that you faced quite a challenge when you became both the acting commissioner and then the full-time commissioner with the backlog that you were faced with. And I know that when you were appointed, you made that commitment to maximize the effectiveness and the timeliness of the investigative function to fully meet the current needs and expectations of Canadians. So can you give us a little bit more detail on your progress on that and the timelines of how you're dealing with requests that are coming through your office? I know you've given us some of that, but do you have any more detail that you can share with us?
Well, essentially what I gave you are the key figures. I can tell you what our targets are. In our report on plans and priorities, my targets for the OIC are quite ambitious. Basically, I want to have all of the more simple complaints, what we call the administrative complaints, dealt with within 90 days. About 85% is my performance measure. And this year, in that respect, I am at 50% from the date that files are registered. From the date that they are assigned, I stand at 70%. So I think that we're making good progress on that. In terms of the old files, we used to have, you remember, maybe not, I do, 1,600 files that dated prior to 2008. I have 30 left. I closed another one last week. I'm hopeful that these are going to be gone. Some of them were the CBC files, which had been on hold for quite a while because of the Federal Court of Appeal decision. But all of those really old files are assigned. And, you know, my goal ultimately, when I finish this mandate in 4 years, is to leave the next commissioner with a contemporary inventory of with a manageable size, which would be about 3 months of cases. Whether that's feasible, as you'll see, I think I have something in my handout. I'll show you. If you go to page 5 of the handout, at the bottom on table 7, you have a summary of the caseload. And in there you see, you know, how many cases we've closed in the last 4 years. And you see the last 2 years, the year we just finished and the year prior to that, we're slowing down a little bit in the terms of total amount of cases, and that's because we are really dealing with national security files, CBC files, and Canada Revenue Agency files. So these 3 groups on the special delegation files, these are all the cases that deal with national security. We have about 300 of those cases in inventory. They are the most sensitive files. And in that, we have a special project, we have a special team, we have dedicated lawyers, we have portfolio people that deal specifically with the institutions. So we're making good progress. We've closed more of these files this year than the last 4 years, but still quite a ways to come. But that project is working. Canada Revenue Agency, we meet with them regularly. They have very complex files. Large volumes of files dealing with very complex international tax files. So those are very complex files, and we also have specifically assigned folks to these files. Those tend to be more litigious. And the CBC files, I was looking at that this morning actually. We now have about 200 files left with the CBC. And over the years, we had, you know, when we started with, we had almost 1,200 cases with the CBC. We're now at 214. And those ones, we are now dealing with the specific new provision that was put in play with the Federal Accountability Act. That's the difficulty and the complexity with the interpretation of that provision. Although I must say it's going very well with the CBC in terms of dealing with the investigation. So I don't know if I answered that question. It's essentially the three main groups that we have.
Thank you. Yes, you did answer my question. One thing I noticed when I looked through the charts that you gave us and the information, and I'm looking on page 6, Table 8 and Table 9, those list the institutions, and those are mainly, although not all, direct government-run ministries versus Crown corporations. Are the Crown corporations numbers captured under the ministry that they're responsible to, or are there is there another chart that shows Crown corporations and smaller amounts?
No, they would be reported individually. It's just that the amounts that they have are quite small. What you have here on the table 8 is the 15 top institutions that have generated complaints to my office this past fiscal. And the other table is the top, the institutions that have been the top 15 generator of complaints to my office in the last 4 years. The reason why I put that there is because essentially, in terms of scrutinizing performance of institutions, you know, this is the focus, where the focus needs to be. Out of 250 some institutions, these are the institutions where you have the most issues in terms of access to information, most requests, most complaints. And that's why these are there. But in terms of the Crown Corps, they have very few requests year over year now.
When a complaint comes in, I know that there used to be issues with trying to get the information back and having dedicated people in the departments or in the ministries to deal with things. Has that issue been corrected?
We issued several years ago an advisory notice indicating to people that we would expect institutions to provide us with records within a period of 10 days. And I must say, generally speaking, institutions are very collaborative in that respect, and that has generated a lot of efficiencies in our office in dealing with complaints because we actually get the records in a timely manner.
Okay.
Merci.
Am I done?
Oui, le temps est écoulé déjà.
Okay.
Yeah, your time is up. And Mr. Andrews, you now have the floor for 7 minutes.
Commissioner, looking at the table on table 6 on page 5, and looking at the number of access requests to the number of complaints, and we've seen that the number of access requests from 08 to 12 has increased, and the number of complaints has decreased significantly. Why is that? What would you attribute that to?
Well, this is what I reported in my annual report in 11-12, because for the, you know, what we had seen, which I thought was very positive, is there had been a decline in administrative complaints. So administrative complaints are complaints dealing with delays in extensions, and that had been going down quite significantly year over year. And unfortunately, this past fiscal, we don't have these numbers, but those complaints have increased again. So if you look at page 7 and you go to figure 2 on page 7, you'll see in the last column there that you see the yellow basically represents the administrative complaints. And you'll see that in 09, 010, it was almost 50% of the caseload, and then it went down, and now this past fiscal, it has increased again. And we have seen an impact in some institutions in terms of their ability to respond to access requests. Now, we don't have the actual total number of requests for the year 12-13, so I can't tell you the percentage of complaints versus the percentage of requests for this past fiscal.
Do you feel that a requester quite often requests information, gets information, doesn't effectively know the laws of the information that they're allowed to have access to, and they sort of don't lodge a complaint because they don't know the difference. They don't know that they are entitled to certain pieces of information under the Act. Do you have any idea if that's a common practice, or is that a concern?
I can't measure something that I don't see, obviously. I can't speculate on what Canadians know or don't know. Two things. When institutions actually respond to a requester, they inform them of their right to complaint to my office. One. Secondly, one of the issues I have with the Access to Information Act is that there really is no one that is responsible for educating the public under the Access to Information Act. And that really is a deficiency that is almost now unique to the Federal Act.
How would we address that deficiency?
That needs to be amended in the legislation.
Okay. And no, because I've gone through the information process a couple times, and luckily I had someone on staff that knew the Act inside out, and they could say, no, you're entitled to that, and we initiated a complaint, and it did get resolved, but it was complicated that you wouldn't have known that you were entitled to that information unless you're well versed in what you're entitled to. That's why I asked that. In your statement, you talked about when you looked at the report cards, and you made a number of recommendations both at the institutional level and at the Treasury Board Secretariat. You said most of these recommendations have been implemented. What has not been implemented to date?
We made more specific recommendations in terms of training of professionals and professionalization of the ETHI professionals within the institutions. And I know that the Treasury Secretariat is working on that, but that's the one area where there needs still to be more progress. We also had issues with consultations and delegation of authorities, and we still have the ongoing systemic investigations that are looking at how that's being implemented in various departments. So there'll be more recommendations coming out of that. Okay.
What has the responses been to your report cards through 2010, 2011, the reports cards that you've put out? Has it been within compliance?
Well, yes. I mean, the second, or basically the last of the report cards, what we did is we looked at 18 of the institutions that were either at risk or that had done poorly in the initial report card, and out of those 18, 13 had made improvements. So that was very positive. I was very pleased with that in terms of timeliness. As I say, the concern that I have is the past fiscal year. I think that once we have all the stats, it's not going to be the same picture, because it's certainly not what I'm seeing on the complaint side. The increase in administrative complaints and some of the institutions that have generated a lot more complaints than previous years, like the RCMP, cause me concern in terms of what's going on in the system.
Because they're getting more requests, and they're like, has there been any indication of why you're getting these in these institutions in the current year?
Some of them have told us it's because they don't have enough resources to actually respond to the requests. The RCMP, I know there was a change in a lot of people that worked in their ATIP shop. There is the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. There's been an increase in complaints this year. I don't know so far what the reasons for that is. It's too early for us to tell. But there have been some strange things happening there, like their response to requesters saying they have 1 year to complain to my office, where in fact the law was amended in 2007 and it's 60 days. So I don't know what's happening in terms of that institution. So we're seeing these kinds of things happen this past fiscal year.
In your 2010-11 report, there was you described a number of noteworthy investigations. Can you provide us some highlights of which ones of these investigations were sort of most meaningful to you in 2010-11?
Well, the most meaningful investigation was really the one that led to the special report on political interference. And that was the most significant investigation, and really one that generated a lot of work at the office, certainly, in terms of how we conducted that investigation. We conducted many examinations under oath for that investigation, which is unusual for our office. So that really is the one I would point to in terms of seminal investigation for that period of time.
What oh, sorry.
Perhaps we can get back to you later, but we'll now move on to Mr. Carmichael for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Commissioner, for your reports today. Commissioner, I wanted to just ask you, in your 2011-12 report, you refer to the portfolio approach that you've adopted to bringing, I think, a faster, more efficient resolution, let's say, to the number of complaints. And over 30% of your inventory involved two institutions, the CBC and the CRA. I wonder if you could, first of all, just go a little more in depth in explaining the approach. How does it work? Is it a bundling process? Is it consistent people who can work on specific accounts, for lack of a better term? And if you could provide us sort of an update on those two situations. Are we seeing progress? Is it working? How are you feeling about it?
Let me just explain a little bit how I work these files, because we're very small. We're a small office. And basically, every Friday morning, I sit down with the Assistant Commissioner and the Intake Director, and we go through all the new files. It seems strange for a commissioner to do that, but what it does is it gives us a sense of file groupings. You know, we have the case management system, which is a database, and we look at that. But by looking at what's coming in, we actually have a pretty good grasp of groupings. So we'll see, for instance, in a matter of 2 or 3 weeks, we'll see several complaints come in relation to a specific topic. Then we assign these files to one investigator or two, or we keep track of where they are so that they're consistent and they move along at the same pace. Or we'll get one complainant making a large number of complaints to one institution. Then we'll group those, we'll assign those to one person. So we do these kinds of things as they come in because we see the trends. We'll also see, for instance, when there are hot topics that come up, and then we see an influx of complaints. Or we'll see, as I was saying, in relation to the RCMP, in the course of a short period of time, and I'll see that there seems to be a problem in the institution because of the types of complaints we're getting. So depending on what these situations are, we address them differently. We assign them to specific investigators, or I'll keep a closer eye on these files and their progress because of the nature of the topic. Or if it's something that seems to be wrong administratively in the institution, I'll call the head of the institution, give them a heads up. I find sometimes it hasn't necessarily come to the attention of the head of the institution at that time. So I serve as a heads up. I'll basically phone them and I'll say, something's not going right in your access shop. Usually people respond and address it fairly quickly. So, and we have specific groupings, you know, special delegation, as I was saying to your colleague, national security files, then a lot of them are with Library and Archives, or CSIS, or National Defense, or Foreign Affairs. And then we have a very small group of people that do these files. So these people are quite followed. I follow the group of these files and the progress on that. Those ones I'm particularly mindful of because of the sensitivity of the material. I've been quite concerned that the office has accumulated a large number of them, and that's why I have this special project to deal with them, because I don't want these files to linger very long. I think it actually becomes problematic for the sensitive nature of these files.
Just on the numbers, you mentioned the national security number to my colleague and the CBC number. I didn't catch the number on CRA. Was there a number on that?
I have it somewhere.
Okay, well,
it's around 300 files with the
and
CRA.
that's fine. Terrific. So from a process perspective, so I understand how your organization, understand a bit how your organization works. You receive new complaints on a regular basis. You have your Friday morning meetings, but you have this massive, quote, massive inventory of old cases. Do you have a group that focuses exclusively on old files, and so as to keep current when you get these new ones with new complexities and all of the various pieces that you've talked about, that these would be brought to the front of the table and addressed fairly quickly? Is that more or less how you?
Yes, more or less. I mean, as you can imagine, we have more than we can handle, obviously, on any given day. So we do have to make decisions. This is, you don't have this, but this is my little magic table, which I look at all the time. It basically gives me a status of the inventory in terms of numbers and by year, and then I follow through, and then I separate them between special delegations, CRA, and CBC. So then I have the numbers, and actually I have the number for you here. CRA now I have 282 live complaints, CBC 213, and special delegation 334. So that's 46% of the total. And, you know, my oldest file now is 2005, 2006. That's the fiscal year, but I have 2 in that year. So I, you know, as I eliminate the years, I basically know in terms of the old inventory. And I have a specific group of people that deal with the older files. But what I'm finding is the special delegation group actually has a lot of the old files.
I'm guessing then from that chart, that's your screensaver that you look at every morning.
Not quite.
Not quite. Okay. In both reports, you spoke about your two major infractors, CBC and Canada Post, as far as your report card and some substandard results in that area. Could you talk to us about progress that you've made over the course of that time frame? Have you seen an improvement in those organizations that would give you hope, or are we still dealing with challenges that are going to linger for a while?
Well, in relation to the CBC, definitely in terms of responding in a timely manner, the CBC got an A in their last report card. I have virtually no administrative complaints with the CBC that have come in. I think I have, 4 or 5, nothing really to report on. This year we received a low number of complaints with the CBC. I have spoken to the president of the CBC. He is collaborating fully with our investigations. We meet regularly with his team, and we are committed to completing the 200 or so remaining investigations. We will probably at some point come to perhaps an unresolved case in relation to the interpretation of that new provision, because it's a new provision. There is really no jurisprudence on it. When we went to the federal court, it was in relation to my ability to see the documents. It wasn't about the specific wording of that provision. But aside from that, there is nothing to report there. Canada Post, they did send me a work plan following the last report card. They did still get an F. They assured me that they were going to make progress, but in truth, I have not followed up with Canada Post since the last report card. I haven't seen an influx there, particularly worrisome, but they do have challenging investigative files with us for sure.
Thank you.
Merci pour vos
Done?
réponses. Merci pour vos questions.
Thank you,
aussi,
Commissioner.
Mr. Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Carmichael. Mr. Boulris, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to Ms. Legault for coming before the committee today. I'd just like to put my first question in context. The government often claims that it's being transparent, but seems to be rather opaque, seems to actually be very vague. And this last report, we see that Canada has gone to the 20th position compared to 10th, and according to Rights and Democracy, Canada says that Canada is lagging behind in terms of access to information compared to other countries. There are scientists and librarians who have been muzzled. There are reports that have been concealed voluntarily because they were casting doubt on the Conservative government, and even the Parliamentary Budget Officer had to go to court in order to be able to obtain information. So, as Information Commissioner, are you not concerned about this type of attitude? Well, part of your question refers to certain investigations that are ongoing at the Commissioner's office, so I can't comment on specific cases. I was expecting this question. You'll be surprised to hear that I was expecting a question on transparency, and I thought about what I was going to say, because I think I have to be very fair in my response. Now, I gave you this little diagram in your notes. When you're looking at government transparency, there are several components to transparency, and as you can see, open government is a part of that. And as I said, the government has made significant progress. There's also another component called access to information, and I can say that I firmly believe that we are lagging compared to other countries, and I think that we have to amend the Access to Information Act. The Rights and Democracy report actually does compare us with other countries in terms of our legislation, and yes, amendments are required in that area. You only have 5 minutes, so I just want to ask you, you made recommendations to the Treasury Board President, and you said that legislative changes are something you were concerned about. So I'd like to know if you've received a positive response from Treasury Board. Has any commitment or follow-up been apparent? Not in terms of legislative changes. When I wrote, along with my colleagues, to the President of the Treasury Board regarding the Open Government Initiative, the response indicated that the government would work towards administrative changes in the access to information regime, and that is what they are doing. I did not receive a positive response to legislative changes. Thank you for specifying that answer. I think it's important to know. I'm going to quote David Aiken, and I'll read the quote in English because it was written in English.
David Aiken. An article, the title is 30 Years of ETHI and It's Getting Worse. And he writes, for example, the Department of Foreign Affairs and International Trade and possibly other departments are now trying to frustrate ETHI requests by requiring preparation fees. I complained about this to the Information Commissioner. The Commissioner saw sense of my reasoning and called on Foreign Affairs Minister John Baird to get his department to modify its practices. He told Commissioner Legault to forget about it. Qu'est-ce que vous pensez de ce genre d'attitude d'un ministre?
What would you say to that kind of attitude from a minister of the Conservative government regarding access to information for the media? Well, in terms of fees for access to information, I do have a position that is clearly opposed to that of the government in terms of interpreting legislation and regulations on fees. Our difference of opinion is clear. I have tried to resolve this in many ways unsuccessfully. And so I have now referred this to the federal court, and we will see what the federal court, how the federal court rules on that reference. Thank you. In your opening remarks,
Vous avez spécifié que ça va bien quand j'ai des enquêteurs disponibles. Vous avez dû.
Said that things are fine when you have investigators who are available. You said that you have suffered cuts. So we have a government that is claiming to be transparent, but it's kind of like a tax avoidance. It's all very well to say you're against tax avoidance, but then you cut in the CRA. So I would like to know if requests for information have been affected by those government cuts. Well, I can only speak to the Commissioner of Information's office, and I already said this last year when we were looking at the main estimates. Now, if the Commissioner's budget is cut more than it had been following the measures that were taken in the previous budget, then it does affect the Commissioner's ability to fulfill her mandate. I feel that is the case. Now, in terms of the system in general, what we have seen is that access to information requests are increasing and are increasing significantly. In my opinion, I realize that the Minister has said otherwise, but in my opinion, I am not aware of any extra funds that have been provided for access to information. Over the course of the last year, certainly within the RCMP and the CFIA and Parks Canada, I have seen symptoms, I can't necessarily confirm it at this time, but signs that would lead me to believe that there are access to information problems. And the administrative complaints over the past fiscal year increased by 8%. And what that does do is sort of reverse rather the trend that we have seen over the past several years. So something is happening. When we will have the data for 2011 and 12 and for 12 and 13, because they're not out yet, we'll be in a better position to analyze them. Thank you very much. Thank you. Mr. Butt, you now have the floor.
And Ms. Legault, I want to congratulate you and your office very much. Your reports clearly show that you're making tremendous progress, that you are providing very good service, so long as you have cooperative agencies that you are working with. And when we have agencies like the CBC and some of these other Crown corporations that have made a decision that they're not going to cooperate, Canada Post and others, then I'm sure you must be frustrated. And I think we as parliamentarians are frustrated by that as well. So one of the questions I have for you is, how do you determine the level of investigation of a complaint? How do you weed out nuisance complaints or bulk complaints that come in from one complainant that files multiple applications or multiple requests for your office to look into things? And I know this has been a problem in the city of Mississauga, where I'm from, with its municipal ATIP program, where there's been 2 or 3 individuals who have barraged the office. So I'm not familiar with how you deal with that. Maybe you can enlighten the committee. How do you make sure that you're prioritizing legitimate, responsible requests for service in your office versus ones that are really nuisance or nonsense complaints from complainants? Do you have a process to determine that? And how do you make that, and you and your excellent staff, how do you make that decision?
Well, you know, when I say that the Access Act needs to be amended, there are good reasons for that. There is nothing in the legislation to address, in the federal legislation, there's nothing to address potential abuses of the access system, either at the request level with institutions or with my office. So really, in my office, I have a positive legal obligation to investigate. So it says in the Act, you shall investigate. So whether there are complaints that seem to come in bulk or that seem perhaps to be resolved very quickly, I essentially have to deal with all of them. So I basically deal with the administrative complaints, and these go to one group. We're dealing with the old complaints, they go to another group, and then the rest get mostly allocated with portfolio responses. But there is no discipline system in the Act as it stands. I don't have discretion to take a case or not.
Is your office charging any fees? Are you recovering any revenue at all to do the services that you were doing? Because I know, again, in the case of the city of Mississauga, to file an ATIP request, there's a fee. I mean, you have to pay for a fee, and depending on how many copies the response is, there could be a photocopying charge, etc. So that the agency that's being requested for this information isn't out of pocket. You currently, as it sits right now, you are not permitted, you are not charging any fees at all associated with the services that your office is providing on a cost recovery basis?
No. If somebody makes an access request to an institution, there is a fee, and there are charges that apply for photocopying searches and so on. There are no fees in terms of complaining to my office. When we take matters to court, we, as a matter of general practice, don't ask for costs because we're usually pitted against government institutions anyway, so it all goes back to the Consolidated Revenue Fund, you know, so I don't think that it makes sense to ask for costs. My experience with fees, they do not act as cost recovery. They do not act as a good discipline in the legislation. They are, in fact, probably one of the biggest inefficiencies in the system that we see. I have a case that I will report on in my annual report, which deals with a fee that is charged by a government institution, which is really somewhere in less than $500. And it had to go through the whole process, complaint process, all the way up to the minister. That's completely inefficient. That should just have been waived. It costs more to the system and to taxpayers to charge those fees than to just answer the request. It would be simpler. So for me, the fees in access to information will never act as a cost recovery, and my experience is I think they actually cost more to the system because of the complaints, because of the delays, and the processing of the fees in terms of financial accounting in governments. I think somebody should actually study this because it is not useful as a cost recovery. And if we want discipline, we should look to other legislative mechanisms in the law to prevent nuisance actions.
Each year when you publish your report card and you give agencies ratings, you know, A through F, et cetera, and some go up and some go down each year and so on. When you're looking at that, and you're I think you said Canada Post, you gave an F this past year or two as an example. What's your follow-up with those Crown corporations and with those agencies? Like, are they willing? Like, maybe they're completely caught off guard. I mean, maybe they think they're doing a good job. I don't know. You've rated them, and you come up with a rating of F, or CBC, it was F one year but A the next year, and obviously something happened. So what is the follow-up that you and your people do with those agencies or government departments to make them all A's? Because we want them all to be A's, and I'm sure they want to be A's, but they're not. So are there specific steps you take? Do you contact them very quickly thereafter and say, look, we're happy to provide our staff resources to help you, to get you, so that you have a system in place that gets you that top grade the next time the review's done? Maybe just take a minute or two and explain how you interact with those departments or agencies to improve their performance.
It depends on the agency. It really depends. For the report cards, what we did do is it was a 3-year plan. We did 1 year. Then we let people, then they had to have an action plan, then we gave them a year to basically implement, and then we went back after the 3rd year. And so that's where we saw, and we did see a major improvement in those institutions. I haven't done one since then. What I did do is in the last exercise, I asked people to report on their annual report, because everybody that is a scheduled institution under the Act has to provide a report to Parliament every year in terms of their performance. So what I did, because I was trying to reduce the burden on institutions, I said, okay, well, since you have to report on that, please report on your progress, on my recommendation, in that same report. Instead of me doing another report and asking them to give me a separate thing, I said, okay, do that in there, and I review the reports as well. So we'll be able to monitor it that way to see if they're actually moving forward with that or not. I must say, though, that when you look at the list of the main institutions that generate complaints to my office, they're pretty much the same group. And so what we do now is the Assistant Commissioner actually sees regularly CBC, CRA, Privy Council Office. We now have really contacts with Transport Canada, Health Canada, in various institutions, and I either what I did is I follow up with the deputy ministers of those institutions, and then the assistant commissioner follows through with the assistant deputy minister to make sure that the complaints actually go through. I would, I will see whether I will do other report cards. At this point, I have 4 ongoing systemic investigations, and I want to complete those before I start report cards. We're just too strapped to do all of that. So I'm hoping that between the detailed stats, the follow-up in the annual reports, and the ad hoc interaction with the institutions, that we'll be able to follow on the performance. But I'm waiting to see how that's going to unfold. It depends how this year and the next year goes in terms of the institutions.
Merci pour vos réponses.
Thank you. Mr. Godin is joining us today, and you now have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to welcome Ms. Legault to this committee. Earlier, you said something that bothered me a little. It bothered me because you said it as a commissioner with all the responsibilities that that entails, and considering that we have a government that has claimed that it's transparent. So earlier, you said that on Friday morning I meet my staff and we look at the new cases coming forward. It's something that I shouldn't do, you said. So I'd like you to tell me why. I'm bothered by that. I think the commissioner probably has other things to do. I mean, you could be doing everything including cleaning up. Well, that's a personal management style. Every commissioner, I'm sure, has their own management style. And personally, on a daily basis, I'm aware of about 2,000 ongoing cases. So we have 2,000 ongoing cases in the inventory. So when I go through that exercise, first, I have an excellent memory. So when I look at these cases, I have a pretty good idea of the work that's going through our office. So it's a personal management style. The reason I said I probably shouldn't do that is because leadership experts would probably tell you that I'm being a micromanager. So that's why I said that. I'm just being a little self-critical. But it's something that works well for me, and I'm very comfortable with it. I see. So you're not doing the work that other people should be doing. You just like to take a look at everything that's going on. We're a very small team, so everyone does everyone else's work as well. I understand. So now I'm going to come back to the small team. Your small team is insufficient because the government isn't giving you enough money. So we have this government that claims it's being transparent. It was elected on the platform of transparency. And you, Ms. Legault, you're coming here and telling us that you have a very small team. There are 2,000 ongoing cases. There are many cases, you're telling us. Do you not think this, quote, transparent government should be putting more money into your budget? Well, you'll hear what I have to say about that over the next few weeks. We'll be meeting on the main estimates. I believe strongly, now that I've been here for 4 years, that with all the steps we've taken to improve our efficiency, that if the office does not receive additional funds to undertake its investigations, then yes, we will risk not being able to further reduce our inventory. So I'll leave you with that. I'm not the one to draw the conclusions from that state of affairs. I'd like to come back to the issue of costs. Earlier, Ms. Legault, you said that it's all very well to charge $500 to obtain documents, but then you have to get all these documents out that perhaps might cost even more money, and so you're saying that perhaps it's better not to have those fees. So if we're talking about these $500 that the government doesn't seem to care about, is simply there to discourage those citizens who don't have $500? So it discourages them from coming forward to complain? Because there could be an ordinary citizen who would like to obtain information, under access to information, but they don't necessarily have $500 in fees. So the government doesn't mind if it throws money at this, so that if it prevents people from obtaining information. Well, the way it works in departments is that there are access to information experts who do what they need to do. They follow their guidelines in terms of fees, etc., and they charge a certain amount. I don't think there's this huge design going on here. No, I'm talking about an amount. You said that you didn't agree with those amounts. No, I don't support charging fees to obtain information under access to information legislation. International models actually do not include fees. But from a purely pragmatic viewpoint, fees do not ensure cost recovery. Second, once you have to go through that whole process of cashing a $5 check, it actually costs more than the $5 itself that was recovered. Also, when you charge fees, that itself leads to complaints, and it's costly to investigate complaints. As I said to your colleague, we don't charge amounts to investigate complaints. So I feel that's an inefficiency in the system, and it does not actually generate any sort of cost recovery. So you don't even need necessarily to make those sorts of claims as to whether the government is transparent or not. Just purely from a pragmatic viewpoint, it's not efficient. Thank you. Mr. Drishin, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Ms. Legault, for being here today. Going back to the memory, I remember back in 2009 when I was also on this committee, and that you had come and we talked a lot about report cards, and we talked a lot about the different types of issues that were taking place. And of course, one of the discussions that we had to do with staff turnover and being able. So I'd like to kind of draw that out just a little bit. You know, you want to make sure that you have that institutional knowledge so that it's easy for you, so that when you group all of these different files together and so on, that is working well. So I'm just wondering if, you know, when you're talking about your strategic plan and you talk about how the organization is almost fully staffed, I wonder if you can talk about the staffing situation that you have, plus the, you know, the concept of the institutional knowledge that actually does exist.
Well, actually, this past year has been quite difficult in terms of staffing because of the cuts, actually, at my office. 2 years ago, because we had the cost containment measures, I significantly reduced our internal services quite a lot. And we were able to find positions for all the people that we had to, where we had to cut positions. This past fiscal year, though, I must be very honest, I wasn't expecting my office to have cuts to its budget, given our financial situation. And so we had to go through a workforce adjustment process. And because I wanted to protect my employees, I actually kept vacant positions for them because I cut positions in the chiefs and at higher levels in the organization. I didn't cut any investigator positions, but I had vacant investigator positions in order to secure my employees' employment. I kept those positions open. So that process finished in late January, and so we started a staffing process now. But I have 8 vacant positions in my investigative functions now, because I knew I was going to cut some, and I kept the lower level positions empty until people had decided what they were going to do. So now we're going to staff those positions, and I've still tried to reallocate some funding to investigations out of the internal services. So we should have we have 42 positions now just to do investigations. And so I'm hoping to increase that a little bit within the allocated budget. But I have 8 vacant positions, which I've basically staffed with consultants since the end of the fiscal.
So you feel fairly comfortable then, or confident then, that you can bring in replacements that will have the type of skills that you require to fit in properly with the, or to fit in well with the staff that you already have?
It's a challenge in the access to information world. The new staffing process now, however, I have asked for university degrees. And the other thing that I did about 18 months ago is I actually shifted a little bit. I increased the number of lawyers in the organization. I have lawyers more involved with the investigation. I find that it supplements the difficult investigations better at an earlier stage, and that's working better. So I'm looking at that sort of complement all the time, because the lawyer's involvement earlier on with the investigators actually works well. But we need to constantly do training. We do in-house training on the various provisions of the Act.
With regards to the code of conduct and taking a look at that side of it, because if we're going to talk about people that are there or have moved on, in the 2012 value of ethics code for the public sector, you've got guidelines of conflict of interest and post-employment. It's scheduled to come into effect in 2012-13. I'm just wondering, has your code of conduct come into effect, and how is that implementation going?
Well, as part of our strategic plan, we had consulted our employees, and we basically chose our values at the office. So that's part of our strategic plan. And in terms of the Code of Values and Ethics, that's a good question. I think we're still applying the Treasury Board Secretariat one. We are having an internal audit committee in May. You know, our external audit committee in May, coming up at the end of May. It's focused on human resources, so that's when we'll be discussing the values and the codes of ethics for the organization.
If I have a moment left, going to Table 4, where we have the institutions that receive the most requests and percentage of requests, I just wonder if you could comment a little bit on volume versus complexity, because I think, and we don't have to go through all of them, but it's just a case of looking at, we do get a lot in certain areas. How complicated is it for you to deal with those? Is there some sort of a correlation that you could kind of give us in a quick overview?
Yeah, when you try to understand the access to information system at the federal level, the one thing that everyone has to remember is that Citizenship and Immigration Canada receive half of the total requests across the system. So the increase that we've seen over the years really are mostly within Citizenship and Immigration Canada. If Citizenship and Immigration Canada performs really well, the overall system will perform well. If CIC doesn't perform well, the whole system will come down. They are the main driver of the government performance in terms of access to information. The other groups, actually, that you have there at Table 4 in my handouts, you see those are essentially the top 10 institutions. Those are the ones also that have an impact in terms of statistics. Canada Revenue Agency has a large volume of pages, complex requests, but CIC doesn't. 80% of their requests are less than 100 pages. We've just gotten that from the recent disaggregated statistics that were just published. So basically, in half of the system there, the requests are actually low level, low number of pages, and these exemptions that are applied there are simple to apply. The complexity you'll find in the other agencies that are there. The top 10, that's where you have more complexity. Investigations, commercial information, national security, that's where it is.
Thank you. Your time is up. Mr. Andrews, you have 5 minutes.
Sure. Getting back to the CBC and the progress that has been made after the ruling, give us some idea of how that ruling really freed things up with the number of requests with CBC, and when you look at how it freed it up, why is there a hold up on the 200? Why, in general, not specifically, but in general, why are there still 200 outstanding with the CBC?
Just because we're working through them. What the ruling did is we got the records. We hadn't gotten the records. We couldn't investigate. We didn't have the documents. So that basically allowed us to do the investigation. Out of the 214, there's 113 actually that are 68.1 cases. Out of the whole lot of cases that I have, and I'm saying this because I know that perhaps the private members bill in relation to CBC is going to come up, but of all the cases that I've seen so far in the 4 years, 1,100 or so cases, there's been no cases where there's been an issue with journalistic sources. All of the issue really relates to creative programming material. And we're just working our way through the various facts of each file and trying to resolve them on the analysis that we're working our way through. So far, we have resolved our cases with the CBC, and we are, as I said, working very, very closely with the CBC. I think we meet, the Assistant Commissioner, I think, meets every month with the CBC to go through the files. We have a priority system. We deal with these files. So they're moving along. Eventually, we will come to a disagreement, I'm sure, on the interpretation of that section, but so far, we haven't gotten there.
So far, there's been no disagreement on that section of the Act. The information that was requested by the requesters have actually gone out? Is that...
Well, it's a little bit more complicated than that. I think that what you'll see is that when we report in the annual report, you'll see more details in some of these investigations that have gone through. But, you know, you can have issues in relation to commercial information, for instance, and then there's general administration, and there's program and creative material. Each case is fact dependent. So I really can't talk about a specific file. What I can say is it's extremely complex to work this through, but the institution is collaborating. So far, we are completing the cases. So far, certainly we have not taken a case to court. The complainants so far have not taken a case to court.
What ongoing cases in your office that are consuming most of your resources? Is there some that are consuming the majority of your resources?
It's the three groups: CBC, CRA, Special Delegation.
Okay. And you just mentioned taking to court. How many cases do you have before the courts right now?
I don't have a lot. I mean, I actually provided this to you in that document in case you wondered. If you go to the last page of that handout, you sort of have the last 4 years in terms of how many cases were in court. Now, that doesn't include the appeals or, you know, leaves to intervene in higher courts, but this is essentially what we had in court. So this year, I have 6 in court.
Those 6?
Well, that's a good question. I have, I just got a decision last week, so that was 2, the RCMP, 1 and with Justice. I have 1 with National Defense. I have 1 intervention. I have the reference in relation to the fees, and I have another case with Fisheries and Oceans.
Great, thank you.
Merci. Donc,
Thank you. I don't have anyone on the list, so that wraps up our time with Ms. Legault on her 2 reports. Thank you very much for coming today, and I believe we'll be seeing you again on the main estimates. Thank you again for coming, and that ends our meeting for today. We'll meet again on Monday. Thank you very much again for coming. We'll see you again soon. The meeting is adjourned.